What is actually rather safe, yet everyone treats it as far more scary than it is. Story 1. Speaking as a person who grew up in the 70s, going to the dentist. Going to the dentist when I was young was damn near medieval torture, and I avoided it in my later years. But after my son married a dentist, and she had me in for some much-needed dental work, I saw just how far the treatment had come and that it was a relatively pain-free and pleasant experience. Story 2. Let's talk about the misunderstood hero of the insect world, spiders. Seriously, these 8-legged artists are like nature's pest control, silently taking care of the bug business. Yet everyone treats them like tiny arachnid assassins. It's time to give spiders a break. They're more into creating web art than plotting world domination. So next time you see one, just appreciate the tiny architect doing its job. Story 3. GMO food. I hate to tell you, but pretty much everything you eat has been genetically modified. Why do you think bananas don't have seeds anymore? Or corn is so sweet and juicy? Over time, we picked what we liked and modified it. Blended, created new things. 'Cause cotton candy grapes definitely are just from nature. Story 4. Letting your kids go off and explore on their own. No, pedophiles aren't laying in wait to snatch your kid from the shadows. The vast majority of abductions are at the hands of someone the child knows, and even more likely at the hands of a non-custodial parent, as it's pretty much always been. Story 5. Australian wildlife. While we have more than our fair share of potentially dangerous critters, the vast majority are either in remote areas, will flee the moment they sense you coming, or hardly ever move from their hiding spots. Generally, in order to have a fatal encounter with the wildlife here, you'd have to seek them out, invade their territory, and intentionally provoke them. On the other hand, I've seen videos of bears, wolves, and big cats stalking people and breaking to homes. Story 6. The unsung hero that's treated like a horror movie but is actually a walk in the park. Elevators. Seriously, these metal boxes of vertical transport get a bad rap. Statistically, you're more likely to be struck by lightning while being audited by the IRS than experience elevator drama. So next time you step in, enjoy the brief, drama-free descent or ascent without imagining a cable snap. Elevators, the underrated, gravity-defying chariots of daily life. Story 7. As a person in a very rural community, it blows my mind how many people never venture to the big city because of the violent crime. What's ironic is that our small town has a higher incidence of murder, assault, and hard drug use than the 3 larger cities within a 4-hour drive. But no, mention going to Memphis or Nashville. Are you trying to get shot? It gets really frustrating when you want to do something cool or fun, like a concert or festival, and none of your brainwashed friends and neighbors can get on board. They are perfectly content living their whole lives never going to a real shopping mall, IKEA, Whole Foods, a decent upscale restaurant, or seeing their favorite bands in concert. Just chilling with the cows in the cornfield to avoid getting mugged at every red light in the city. Story 8. Cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York. It's fear-mongering. Those cities are incredible pieces of culture with millions of things to do and experience. There are bad areas that you don't want to go, but that applies to every place. But you can walk around almost anywhere in those cities and be fine. Story 9. Radiation. I'm a physicist, and I work with radioactive sources every day. The levels it takes to hurt you are extremely high. Humans are extremely good at detecting radiation, and past accidents involving radiation and contamination have been blown way out of proportion. It's perfectly safe, for example, to handle a source that makes a Geiger counter scream. But when people hear the clicking, they get scared. Also, there is evidence that radiation is possibly healthy for us in small amounts, spurring on DNA's natural repair functions, actively preventing cancer. More study is needed to be sure. Also, the danger level for radon in homes is almost certainly higher than 4 pci/L. The measurements that led to that regulation were not the best. Again, more study is needed to determine a good level. Story 10. Undercooked pork. You can't eat it rare, but it doesn't have the same issues chicken does. In the same vein, raw eggs don't give you salmonella. It's like a 1/20,000 chance to get an egg that would make you sick. If you ate a raw egg every day, which why would you? The odds are you run into one within nearly 57 years. Story 11. Video games for some reason. People play games to relax. Some may play more brutal games to get aggression out, but it definitely doesn't make them aggressive. Anyone that gains delusion of grandeur or desensitization to IRL violence from games most likely has pre-existing issues that could span from anger management issues to schizophrenia. Parents need to leave the game industry alone and read the clearly labeled age ratings on the games they buy their child. Shit is like blaming cars for drunk drivers. Story 12, Mexico. There are dangerous places, sure, but to say it's a hellhole when the USA also houses some of the most dangerous places in North America is disingenuous, to say the least. I've been to Mexico many times, and its people, food, arts, and landscapes are stunning, and simply don't reflect the rhetoric spewed from the racists that only see the worst. Story 13. I work at the medical examiner office, and when the electric scooters started becoming popular in cities, I was like, so many motherfuckers are going to meet their doom on those things. Vehicle versus bicyclist is such a common death in spring-summer, but it's been 5 years since they've popped up in my city, and I've never had a scooter-related death. I'm sorry to whomever I have summoned. Story 14. Most of the food chemicals that people cite as being harmful for you, aspartame, MSG, etc. Whenever discussion of these comes up, there's always a few people who anecdotally go, "Oh yes, I hate the taste. It gives me headaches, I feel rotten, etc. So I agree it must be toxic. So banned." They don't seem to get that food allergies/intolerances exist, and that, for example, some people are allergic to alliums, but nobody's calling for us to ban onions and garlic. Good food labeling rules are where it should be. Also, stranger danger, as a borderline case. While not always safe depending on where you are, an overwhelming proportion of the really bad stuff that happens to kids happens at the hands of people they know. Family, friends, and acquaintances are by far the most likely to be the perp in most cases. While a laudable goal, and it's done good work, concentrating so heavily on the never talk to strangers, they'll lure you into a van and kill you idea has left a massive blind spot in the danger awareness of many people that essentially renders them incapable of believing people they know or are close to are capable of hurting them. Story 15. Riding a motorcycle. Yes, it can be dangerous, but everyone treats it as though you are guaranteed to end up in the hospital. I've been riding for over 20 years and have never had an accident because I ride smart and am always on the lookout for everyone else. 99% of motorcycle accidents are avoidable by either not riding like an idiot or watching out for the drivers who don't know you exist. Story 16. Vegan diets. Don't get me wrong, it definitely requires knowledge to do it right, but the data is pretty clear. When done right, it's as healthy as the Mediterranean diet. And that's consistently shown in what is an absolutely enormous amount of data and literature to be one of the healthiest ways of eating for an enormous amount of outcomes, including all-cause mortality, several cancers, CVD risk, Alzheimer's, and much more. I don't care if anyone is vegan or not. I'm just surprised that people still think it's an unhealthy way of eating after all this time. Story 17, psychedelics. People react so crazy when you mention having casually done mushrooms or LSD. If you were likely going to become schizophrenic or something anyway, sure, it can be a triggering event. But if you weren't and you take mild doses, it's absolutely fantastic and life-changing and even cures depression and other mental issues in many people. I took every antidepressant doctors would prescribe to no avail. Nothing changed. I do mushrooms a few times a year and have zero depression. They also aren't addictive at all, and it's kinda impossible for them to be because if you take them multiple days in a row, they lose effectiveness. And you wouldn't really want to. The immediate day after, you usually feel sleepy and want to rest like you spent the day before at a theme park and are worn out. Anyway, lots of people are gonna probably freak out. I even said this. Story 18. Various materials and chemicals that we consider toxic, like asbestos, PCBs, benzene, etc., actually pose far lower risk of disease, death, than many things that we consider safe. For example, even at significantly elevated exposure levels from any of these chemicals, your lifetime risk of death from a biking accident, getting run over while crossing the street, choking to death on food, drowning while swimming, are all a lot higher than getting, for example, cancer from exposure to any of these chemicals. Also, your odds of just randomly getting cancer are far higher than getting leukemia from, say, benzene exposure. The risks associated with these chemicals are vanishingly small unless you experience massive exposures, like in an uncontrolled occupational setting for years. Story 19. Mold. I have a quarter-century experience in mitigation. And while yes, you don't want it in your house as water damage is bad, and yes, a large amount can make you feel sick from an immune system reaction, 99.9% of people will return to being just fine after it's removed. and spore counts are brought back down to normal background levels. Yet there is an entire fear and ignorance-based industry, mostly internet-based, centered around it. I've had numerous calls from young new mothers literally sobbing on the phone because they found a 1-2-inch patch of cladosporium on the windowsill in the nursery. Story 20. Been seeing a lot of discourse online recently about how eating reheated rice is dangerous. I have eaten reheated rice all my life. I have even reheated frozen rice and ate it with no problems. One time, I left the rice in my rice cooker overnight and freaked out thinking I had wasted so much rice and would have to throw it out. I looked if it was safe online and saw a Quora answer from a Filipino, or maybe it was someone from Taiwan. This was months ago. Sorry. Laughing because they have always left their rice to cool overnight. Basically, they were like, "How shitty is your rice that it goes bad so easily?" LMAO. Trusted them and ate the rice I left out with no problems. Story 21. Brown recluse spiders. The tales of their deadly bite are legendary, but they very rarely actually bite anybody. They're called recluse for a reason. You could have 100 in your house and only see one every few months. If you live in recluse area, you'll be safe if you shake out your clothes and shoes before putting them on, because the spider's fangs aren't strong enough to pierce through fabric. Story 22. The high-voltage batteries in electric cars. There are several things to understand here. Most car fires, whether electric or ice, are the result of damage, mostly during a crash. In ice, it's usually a result of fuel leaking into hot engine parts, either as a result of crash damage or poor maintenance. In electric cars, it's the battery being compromised and shorted out. The figures just doesn't support the hysteria. In the US, ice car fires are roughly 20x as common as electric car fires, per 100,000 sold. Most electric car fires do not involve the battery at all. It's common for a car to be burnt out completely while the battery is still intact. Electric car fires that do involve the battery burning are almost always because of impact damage. Thermal runaway is exceptionally rare. Think about it. It's at worst the same chemistry as the battery in your phone that you put in your pocket next to your genitals. Speaking of chemistry, there are several that offer a different mix of energy density and cost. The common one, referred to simply as lithium-ion or Li-ion, is really Li-ion NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt. It's the oldest and most widely used, offers the highest energy density. Lithium iron phosphate, LiFePO4 or LFP, has a slightly lower energy density, is cheaper, and has the added benefits of being more resistant to fire and thermal runaway, more resistant to degradation, etc. It's constantly improving too, with manufacturers finding novel ways to increase energy density all the time. There are other chemistries too, sodium ion being the most promising and most likely to make it to widespread production. Right now, economies of scale hasn't kicked in, but it will be cheaper in the end due to the raw materials being cheaper and easier to work with. Battery fires can be extinguished. It requires different kit, and not all fire departments are equipped/trained yet. That will take time. The reason they mostly let them burn for a very different reason. It makes handling the wreck much safer if you don't have to deal with a structurally compromised battery that still has a charge. Speaking of raw materials, electric car batteries do not contain any rare earth elements. We're also not going to run out of it. Existing reserves will see us through several decades, and new reserves are being discovered all the time. Also, electric car batteries absolutely will not end up in landfills. First, once they're sufficiently degraded to make them impractical for car use, will be repurposed for stationary storage, where weight and space is not a constraint. There are already grid batteries using old Nissan Leaf batteries. Once they're too old and degraded for that job, they will be recycled, because they're made up of valuable metals that are in high demand. There are already companies doing exactly this profitably. Not only that, but as methods improve, the cost per ton is expected to drop below the cost of mining. That is, recycling will actually be cheaper than mining. The media, even the more respectable sources, get this wrong all the time. Whether they're actively participating in spreading FUD or just lazy, almost every report on an electric car fire I've seen got almost everything wrong. One thing specifically, at the time a fire is newsworthy, it is almost never known what caused the fire, particularly when it involves cargo ships. None of the car transporter shop fires were caused by electric cars. Lastly, you'll note I avoided the term EV thus far. This is because, particularly when dealing with figures reported by the media, include all modes of electric transport, that is, cars, motorbikes, e-bikes, e-scooters, etc. This is important because these are not all made to the same standards. Electric car batteries are subject to incredibly strict standards and requirements. They come with sophisticated battery management systems, BMS, integrated thermal regulation, and robust fire protection. For e-scooters and e-bikes in particular, it's the Wild West. They're made to the lowest possible cost in a fiercely competitive market. And it shows. I've seen battery packs that had no BMS at all, just a DC-DC converter wired straight to the terminals, and best of luck to you. To explain this a bit, to safely charge a battery, any battery, not just Li-ion, the charger has to do two things. 1. Monitor the battery voltage, and disconnect once it reaches the target voltage to avoid overcharging, really bad. And 2. Monitor the battery temperature, and throttle the charge rate if the temperature exceeds a certain threshold. You can buy a competent charge control chip for less than $1. So manufacturers' shipping on this is really unforgivable, and regulation is sorely needed here. The result is they are much more likely to catch fire, particularly while charging. And that leads to figures like 600 EV fires in New York City alone last year. All e-scooters and e-bikes, not one was a car. Story 23. Thinking for yourself. Or at least take some time to learn about how to do that. Like grab an intro book on logic, logical fallacies, thinking skills, and problem solving. Why? So you can recognize when people are trying to persuade you, to influence you, to manipulate you, which is all the effing time, and by everyone. And I mean everyone. Sorry, Grandma, that includes you too. So what? Why should I care? Because deep down many of us, actually most of us if I'm being honest, are not happy and probably never will be. Why? Because we spend too much time listening to others, or more correctly, being manipulated by others to do what they want, and not doing what we want to do, or being who we want to be. So change that. And yes, you can. Don't listen to the naysayers. And learning how to think for yourself is a huge first step in achieving freedom and happiness. Unless you want to continue to be a puppet to your family, friends, co-workers, teammates, boss, etc., and live a life of misery. If you can learn to think for yourself and avoid all the psychological tools, like social proof, the bandwagon effect, peer pressure, bad arguments, and just everyday BS, then, as a result, over time, you'll begin to feel empowered, self-reliant, confident, realize your abilities and potential, free yourself from others, and find more peace and happiness. Story 24. Hiking places Appalachian Trail. It's definitely got risks and dangers, but some people act like you're going to be abducted by the hills have eyes if you blink too long. You're far more likely to be hurt by another person while walking a city street, and overall animals prefer to avoid conflict with humans. There are exceptions. You're also more likely to get hit by a car on the street than you are to fall off a cliff on the AT, unless you're really not paying attention. Not that I recommend hiking it alone or without preparation. It still has hazards, but they're more user error or Mother Nature. Just don't whistle at night. For the love of God, do not whistle at night. Story 25. MSG has been proven in countless blind studies to not do a damn thing to you. Some reporter decades ago felt crappy after eating a bunch of Chinese food and blamed it on MSG in an article, took off from there. MSG is sodium glutamate. When you put it in your mouth, the sodium ion detaches, and you have glutamate. You have 4 pounds of glutamate in your body. You eat 11 grams of glutamate from natural foods every day. Baby milk is full of it. The worst thing about MSG is the marketing failure of calling it by its chemical name. Story 26. Glass. Specifically, annealed glass. You know the type that breaks into big scary shards and shapes? It's both less and way scarier than you'd think. Being a glazer, I'm always surprised what will and won't break glass. Been working in glass for 10 years now. Gotten way lucky a number of times. Gotta be a little nuts to work in glass. I love glass. I've seen glass break sitting on the rack, and I've seen it bounce unhurt. I got smacked once and should have been split open and was fine, and I've barely touched an edge and gotten touched. It's weird stuff. Always tell new helpers if anything starts to go wrong, just get away from the glass. Don't catch falling glass. Glass is way cheaper than medical bills, and the pain and suffering getting hurt can cause. Gotta treat it like it's not going to break and it'll kill you at the same time. It's definitely a very Schrodinger's cat. Same kind of goes for tempered. It won't kill you, but it can definitely hurt.